Alcatraz is one of the most sinister places on the planet, and its secluded location makes it impossible to escape. Or so we thought until one sunny day in June 1962, when a group of 3 men disappeared without a trace after descending into the wild waters of San Francisco Bay. Many inmates tried to escape before them without success, and most people believed that the trio met the same fate. The world hadn't heard from them again until 2018, when the FBI received a mysterious letter that forced them to reopen investigation. That changed after the San Francisco Police Department received a cryptic letter that simply read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris." The mysterious letter from a man who claimed to be John Anglin reached the San Francisco Police Department in 2013. But it was kept under wraps for years. The department weren't sure if the man in question was truly who he claimed he is, but the letter contained enough information to get the FBI involved, and the Bureau reopened the notorious case in 2018. The Alcatraz prison closed its doors in 1963 due to high maintenance costs and a poor reputation, but it was often described as the toughest prison on the planet. It was home to some of the toughest criminals in the world, and that's why it was important that any attempt to escape would be impossible. During its 29 years of operation, many inmates wanted to test this theory and tried to escape this maximum security prison. None of them managed to pull it off until John Anglin and his buddies came up with a plan that could actually work. The track record of their fellow inmates who tried to escape in the past wasn't great. 23 were caught, 6 ended up being shot, 2 drowned, and another 2 went missing. The group of men who came up with the plan for the Great Escape in 1962 originally included brothers John and Clarence Anglin, Frank Lee Morris, and Alan West. Their cells were in a close proximity to each other's, and that made it easier to come up with an idea to leave their prison lives behind. The historic Alcatraz escape wasn't exactly the first ride on the rodeo for Frank Lee Morris. His fellow inmates saw him as a criminal mastermind because he was a highly skilled, intelligent man who already managed to escape from a prison before. Morris lost his parents when he was 11 and spent his youth jumping from one foster home to another. He quickly learned to take care of himself, but lacked authority figures in his life. That's probably why he turned to crime at a young age and ended up being convicted for his first crime when he was just 13. Unfortunately, Frank Lee Morris never got back on the right track and ended up serving time in multiple states during his adulthood. One of them was the Louisiana State Penitentiary, commonly known as Alcatraz of the South. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison after committing a bank robbery, but he somehow managed to break free. Lee Morris quickly went back to his old ways and was caught about a year later after committing another robbery. Frank Lee Morris was a criminal mastermind, but the most dangerous prison escape isn't something you can pull off on your own. He needed a team of equally skilled men and found what he was looking for in Alan West and the Anglin brothers. John and Clarence grew up surrounded by many siblings. Their parents had 13 children, and they were basically inseparable. The bond between the 2 brothers was always strong, but their adventures eventually took a dark turn. The Anglin brothers started robbing banks together during their adult years and ended up being arrested in 1956. The Anglin brothers were initially sent to the Atlanta Penitentiary, and they didn't like it one bit. They tried to escape so many times that the people in charge no longer knew what to do with them and decided to send them to Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. In addition to being one of the world's most notorious prisons, Alcatraz served as a factory, producing furniture, clothes, and shoes for the U.S. military. The Anglin brothers and their associates were able to come across many resources that could aid their escape. They only had to find a way to take them without anyone noticing. The 4 inmates knew it won't take long for the guards to figure out that they're no longer there. Fortunately, they came up with the perfect decoy, placing human-like dummies in their place. Designing these papier-mâché-inspired dummies wasn't easy. They used a mixture of soap, toothpaste, concrete dust, and toilet paper to put them together. However, that wasn't enough to make them look realistic. That's when the duo came up with an idea to use the paint from the maintenance shop and hair from the barbershop floor to give the dummies a more human-like appearance. They also piled towels and clothing under the blankets. Leaving the dummies behind wasn't enough to pull off an epic escape. The four also had to come up with a way to leave without getting noticed, and decided the way to go was digging up huge holes in their cells. Alcatraz was in such horrendous conditions that it aided their escape. The building was old and crumbling in many places, and digging up holes was easier than they expected. After prison reforms in the early 1960s, inmates had 1 musical hour on their disposal, and he used it to play the accordion inside his cell. His associates used the sound of his music to mask the noise from the banging and chipping that comes with digging a huge hole inside your cell. Once they accomplished this, the team was finally able to access the roof of their cell and used it to store the items they needed in order to pull off the second part of their plan, the Great Escape. By the time May of 1962 rolled around, Morris and the brothers managed to break through the walls of their cells. They weren't big enough to squeeze their bodies inside, but they felt positive about the outcome. One thing that worried them was surviving the wild water of San Francisco Bay. But they came up with the perfect solution. They collected over 50 old raincoats and stitched them together to create a raft and life vests. Their chances of getting out were always hanging by a thread, but they couldn't stop dreaming of getting their freedom back. As their fellow inmates shut their eyes and went to sleep, Morris and his gang tried to do something no one has ever managed to before: escape Alcatraz for good. Waited for Alan West to finish up his hole. It turned out he had trouble squeezing into it. He apparently misjudged its size from the get-go. He wasn't going to give up, but no matter how much he tried, the cement wouldn't budge, and even after Morris tried to help him, their efforts have proven to be fruitless. Despite the fact they did everything else as a team, the trio was forced to leave West behind. This was their only chance to succeed, and so they kept climbing until they reached the utility corridor. Unlike West, Morris and the Anglin brothers had no trouble climbing the ventilation shaft and making it to the roof. Their hearts were pounding as they descended 50 feet to the ground by sliding down the kitchen vent pipe. After climbing up barbed wire fences, the trio finally made it to the shore, and after they inflated their raft and life vests, they left Alcatraz behind. We'll probably never know what happened to Frank Lee Morris and the Anglin brothers, as that was the last time they were ever seen alive. It was estimated that they set off their makeshift raft sometime around 10 p.m. and embarked on an adventure of a lifetime. We'll also never know what they were doing the next morning, but the rest of the Alcatraz inmates had their sleep interrupted by blaring sirens. The only person who wasn't surprised by the sirens was, of course, Alan West. After he finally succeeded climbing up to the roof, West came to the conclusion he had slim chances of making it to safety on his own and went back to his cell. He shared everything he knew with the authorities and told them the runaways were headed to Angel Island, where they planned to steal a car and go their separate ways. The investigators immediately followed up on that lead, but came up empty-handed. If they managed to survive the whole ordeal, the trio probably assumed that West was going to share their plan with the cops, and so they must have come up with a different plan. On the other hand, there was no guarantee they survived at all. Anyway, the FBI decided to launch a formal investigation into this case. Conspiracy theorists like to believe that this trio made it out alive, but surviving the chilly waters of the San Francisco Bay is no easy feat. Experts suggest that a human adult male can survive for only around 20 minutes in water this cold before their body functions start to deteriorate. Morris and the Anglin brothers managed to pull of many impossible things with their escape, but did they manage to fool Mother Nature as well? About a month after the incident, a Norwegian freighter informed the U.S. authorities they had spotted a body 17 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge, but this ended up being a useless lead. After 17 years, the FBI closed its investigation on December 31, 1979. The authorities concluded that the inmates probably drowned and decided to leave it at that. Back in 2015, the History Channel aired a documentary about this intriguing case, presenting further evidence gathered by the Anglin family in the decades to come. They shared handwritten Christmas cards from the two brothers, but experts couldn't determine the date of delivery. A family friend also claimed to have spotted the brothers in Brazil in 1975 and took a picture of two men who resembled John and Clarence Anglin. Robert Anglin made a deathbed confession that shook the world. He claimed John and Clarence reached out to him in 1963 and kept in touch until 1987, when they eventually lost contact. This was the first time someone made the case that they might have actually managed to escape. In 2013, that has changed, as the San Francisco police received a letter detailing the whereabouts of the Alcatraz inmates that managed to pull off the Great Escape. The man who wrote the letter claimed he's John Anglin and listed several places where he lived following the escape, including Seattle and North Dakota. According to his letter, Frank Morris and his brother Clarence both died a couple of years before he sent the letter, and he was battling cancer at the time of its writing. One thing about the letter that seemed extremely fishy was the writer's claim that he's still living in Southern California. It just didn't make sense that a man who pulled off one of the most daring prison breaks the world has ever seen still had the guts to live just a few hours away from San Francisco. After years of moving from place to place, the writer who claimed to be John Anglin said his health has suffered a huge blow. He desperately wanted to get help, even if it meant striking a deal with the FBI and going back to jail. Law enforcement couldn't make a deal with Anglin before investigating the letter and confirming he really wrote it. The FBI carefully examined it, looking for fingerprints and possible traces of DNA. They also analyzed the handwriting by comparing it to writing samples of all three men who managed to escape from the rock. According to local TV station KPIX, the FBI's results were inconclusive. They've never confirmed nor denied that the letter was written by Anglin, and one of the station's security experts remarked that their final verdict leaves everything in limbo. Even after the letter from John Anglin brought this case back to the spotlight, the U.S. Marshals didn't have anything to fall on too, since they believed it's not legitimate. They provided an official statement in response to the letter's publication and made their position pretty clear. There's absolutely no reason to believe that any of them would have changed their lifestyle and became completely law-abiding citizens after this escape, read the statement that was originally published by KPIX. Many people still believe that there's no way these three inmates managed to survive that night in the freezing water of San Francisco Bay. One study from 2014, however, points out there's still a tiny chance they actually survived. Researchers have used a computer model to recreate the event and came to a conclusion that the water currents would have been working in their favor. Despite many pieces of evidence emerging over the years, the fate of Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin remains uncertain. We'll probably never know if they met an early death or spent their lives as free men.